And always we remind you to turn off your mobile device or put on vibrate. Thank you. We've changed it up a little bit. My council has decided that we're not going to share a safety share no longer in the future, so it's all fair. And if you at home want to have that changed up, you can by all means call into your administration team and have that request put back on the agenda. That was my little plug. Sorry, I had to throw that out there. Thank you. Okay. With that being said, I have a motion here that we accept the agenda, or any deletions of the agenda as well. Sorry. No, I didn't. We're good. So with that being said, I have a mover and a second to accept the agenda as presented. Moved by Councillor Vallon, second by Councillor Lake. Thank you. All in favor? Thanks. Okay, I'm not too sure if we're on with, I think we're on at home, but our screen's just not showing it, so hopefully you're all there. Any disclosure of interest this evening? Hearing none, I do have a motion here that council hereby approves the minutes of the regular meeting of council held on Monday, January 13, 2020, as well as the closed meeting that was also held on January 13th, 2020, as circular amended. Moved by Councillor Tabushi, second by Councillor Lake. Any questions, errors, or omissions of those minutes? Hearing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Carry, thanks. Okay, this evening we have no delegations, but we do have some updates on the attendance of the Roma conference that was held in Toronto last week. Councillor Debussy, Councillor Valence, and myself, as well as our CEO, Mr. Skorchinski, attended. So we'll start off with Councillor Debussy and some of the stuff he has taken in.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of attending the Roma conference. Some of the concurrent sessions I attended was cannabis growth and the issues around, I guess, private growing operations. There were some recommendations from that, that it's not the, I'll say, corporate entities that they've become very good corporate citizens. It's what's kind of a gray area that's developed that you can grow up to so many plants for your medical or personal use, but some doctors are issuing plants up to 100 per patient. And then they get collectives together, and an example was they had one operation that was licensed for 1,500 plants through a collective of people who required their medical marijuana. And when they did an audit, they figured that there were somewhere around 4,000 plants. And it puts a lot of strain on the water table, the energy usage around these areas. So one of the recommendations moving forward, and I was going to pass this on to administration, is both the FCM and the Roma and AMO all have draft bylaws that you may want to consider, not that Marathon provides the greatest growing climate, but in those rural or in the areas of, I'll say, former big tobacco grow operations, that's a perfect climate. So I think it's the one thing we should at least explore and find out something about the bylaws moving forward on personal use marijuana. The other two sessions I attended were both had to do with broadband access. And one of the things that was brought forward is even small communities can become, and the new phrase I guess is smart communities, where you can link up and you can get economic development through the accessibility, I guess, of 5G plus issues. One of the problems with smaller areas is the economic viability for the big players to get in. And one of the recommendations was, as a community, become active in recruiting it yourself. And I think we're moving towards that, but I just wanted to see how other communities were moving forward on that. The other one had to do with rural social issues in rural areas, because we don't have the supports for mental health and some addictions, and how that puts a burden on, I guess, the communities, both socially and economically. One of the big ones was the opiate crisis moving down there. And I thought it was a big city issue, but it's become a rural and small community issue. So I think those were important things to at least move forward on. And again, some of the leaders of the official parties and other parties had made statements, which was interesting. And then there was some consultation about, or ability to have some consultation into the future upcoming Ontario budget that I think we should provide some opportunity, or moving forward, at least put a deputation forward for that, so.
Good, thank you for that. Councillor Valens.
So this is actually my first opportunity to attend the Roma conference, and thank you for that opportunity. With that being said, with my role on the Board of Health, made it my mission to get in as many presentations in regards to that platform. So I was able to sit in on the Minister of Health presentation, and then there was also a consultation type presentation between the Minister of Health and some of her team in regards to the modernization of public health and EMS and the shift, how that's all playing out, what they've heard back, results from their consultations. And then with that being said, like I mentioned, it was my first time, so I had the opportunity to attend with Rick. We went to the Bear Pit, for people who don't know, they line up all the ministers with all their different portfolios, and people essentially just get to pelt them with questions. So that was interesting to see kind of how they engage and interacted with the public and how their composure and everything. So that was quite the experience. The next morning we had the opportunity, or I was actually invited by the board of NOMA to sit in their, I don't know, would you call it a delegation? The board with all the ministry. So again, on a little bit more of a personal setting, it was the board of NOMA, that's Northern Ontario Municipal Association, with all the ministers. So it was nice to kind of see Mayor Dumas and all the other mayors along the North Shore and get out questions and feedback and stuff like that from the ministers in regards to transportation, highways, all that kind of stuff in our neck of the woods. A little bit more personalized to our, I wouldn't say our struggles, but I guess our opportunities and our weaknesses in the north. And from there, I guess the opportunity just to network and get to meet and befriend more counselors and stuff like that was awesome. So yeah, again, thank you for the opportunity.
Great, thanks for that, Councillor Valens. I'm glad you had the opportunity to meet up with a lot of people, and networking is a key component of that, to learn about what's happening in other municipalities. You can relate to yours. I took in various different sessions. Obviously met and discussed with the Premier of Ontario in his keynote speech. I did an impact learning lunch and talk about the change in the impact assessment scenarios. I took a session on leadership approach and psychological health in the workplace. I kind of emailed back a lot of stuff to Andrea while I was in the session, showing her some of the key things I think is great for our community, not only ours, but other communities, about mental health and wellness within the workplace. It was really, I learned a lot about it, as well as I took in the Bear Pit, as Councillor Valens made mention, and listened to some of the key questions that other communities had, but a lot of them were focused on the agriculture, which I was really surprised this year. Was a lot about agriculture, but you got to remember, Rural Ontario Municipal Association is basically set up for the south, the east of Ontario, so there was a lot of that. I took in a session on business innovation within the community and working with your business community and how you can create a lot of opportunities from the municipalities level. And of course, we then had our key meetings with ministers. We were not able to get in with the Minister of Finance and Minister of Infrastructure on our key ask was in regards to our Active Living Center. We thought that was just another opportunity to bring it forward. We're in the process of the applications in, but we're waiting for a notification whether or not we're accepted to phase 2 of that funding model. Then of course, we also had the opportunity to meet with Red Lake with Impact, and I'll let Mr. Skorczynski highlight some of the talks there, as well as meeting with roundtable with Minister of Northern Development Mines on LNG, and also let Daryl highlight some of that stuff because he's been key on the file. Those were very valuable meetings, and I think we got a lot of traction on that, and they of course heard Marathon's voice loud and clear around the roundtable, so that was really good. As well as we talked to the Minister Jones and talked about the community safety plans that we all have to create. We looked at opportunity for toolkits. There's going to be a lot of stuff coming down from the Attorney General's office in regards to how policing services boards, amalgamations, community safety plans all come together and how they work. And then I just give a quick highlight in regards to my NOMA, but prior to that, you have another comment?
Yeah, I just would like to add the fact of you did a great job of driving home the fact that Marathon and the situation table that all the service providers do in order to access at-risk clients, that was really well received by the ministry, and they really much liked the kind of platform or equation of bringing together all the service providers, and a lot of kudos to the service providers in the community for doing so.
Absolutely, good point, and that was, the minister did like that, because we do have a great situation table here in Marathon that brings together those agencies. Then, of course, with Councillor Valens making note of that, I invited him in to sit with NOMA to give him the experience of sitting there and understanding how NOMA presents to the various ministries. We had 6 ministers at the table, and we talked about specific items that affect a lot of us in the Northwest, which is policing. Policing in Marathon has actually been okay. We've come down in pricing, but there's still communities within Northwestern Ontario that are still affected by high policing costs. And also the city of Thunder Bay, being the major hub of the Northwest, is having huge problems with opioids and other drug-related issues. And it becomes a whole issue of mental health, locking them up, taking them off. Maybe that's not the answer. Maybe there's an answer of another type of facility, but if that, of course, costs money. So that was presented to the ministers. We also made it very clear this time around that we wanted to have solutions that we've presented every year. Either they're going to be taken care of on the table or take it off the table, and let's move on to another issue. We don't want to keep coming back talking about the same issue, because we talked to them when they were in the opposition. Now they're in power. Let's get it done or not and take it off. So we made that clear. We talked a lot about the inter-community bus transportation system. As you're aware, that they did fund through the Liberal government Ontario Northland $3 million, but it doesn't come our way. It goes as far as White River, back up the 11 corridor. We asked them for additional funding to help offset the carrier today, which is only one carrier, and that carrier is being struggled in regards to its Casper bus, but Casper is struggling right now to meet and his bills and keep a service provided throughout the Highway 17 corridor. We also talked about winter highway maintenance, and so lo and behold, I drove up Sunday morning after our snowstorm, and of course our section was a little rough again, so I made that very clear to the minister. And Minister Mulrooney said that she would have her, her deputy minister coming up through Northern Ontario and going to drive the highways to come and meet with us to discuss highway conditions and highway improvements. We thought that was awesome. So not fly in, actually fly to Thunder Bay and then drive. So it's going to be interesting to see how that looks. Safe Northern Highways is part of it as well. We did a consultation and process with NOMA, with the Finns, and the Swedish governments have taken on a program called 2-for-1 roads. And we brought that, and the government has looked at this somewhat as a study. 2-for-1 roads is simply this: instead of having just passing lanes, when you put a passing lane, that passing lane is dedicated for 5 or 10 kilometers, and there's a rail, like similar to Highway 11 corridor. There's a rail. There's no passing, nothing. There's no hindrance of accidents. And in those Nordic countries, they're similar landscape as ours. They've knocked down their deaths by 57% on their highways so far, and they're continuing to improve that program to have all their highways. So we said from Thunder Bay to Sault Ste. Marie, we're never going to see 4-lane highway, but as you do development of 3 lanes, incorporate that 2-for-1 highway. So they're going to look at that and see if there's opportunities. And of course, forestry is getting some movement. They're understanding after our little protests on the Nipigon River Bridge. They've understood some of the impacts that it's had, and they've listened to the both ministries of Northern Development, Forestry as well as Environment. Listened to about the caribou migration in the Superior Corridor, and they've put the brakes on that, so they are listening and they're working with us. So we're getting traction. Then, of course, I had the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Marjorie House to Minister Smith and Mr. Clark in regards to their circumstances around the situation table, about how they're having some crisis situation with overflow of the home. There's 10 beds, and sometimes they're having 15 or 20 individuals in those beds. They've reached out to the municipality. We said we would share this information to the government, and we are not a funder of the Marjorie House. It is specifically funded through the Community Social Services. So we've asked that Minister Smith, to identify if there's opportunities for special one-time funding for crisis or whatever it might be. So it was a very good conference over it all in all, and I'll ask Mr. Skorzinski to give a highlight of a couple of those key meetings that we took around the roundtables. Thank you, sir. Councilor Tabushi.
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, the other important one that we should be on our radar moving forward is the Blue Box. Now, we don't run a Blue Box program per se, but we do recycling. We do recycling in Marathon. And under the new program of full producer responsibility, although they have a 6-year, I believe, phase-in issue to implement it, will fundamentally change how Blue Box and recyclables are going to be collected and or how it's going to be reimbursed, I guess, in a sense, to get those to market or back to market. So I think that's something in moving forward that the administration should be looking at about how do we position ourselves, because we are under no obligation to recycle, but with the full, I'll say, producer responsibility, there's going to be some kind of portion where they're going to have to collect their own, I'll say, waste and packaging. So I think it's something that moving forward, administration should keep an eye on, because there may be an opportunity to help offset some of the costing, or have our, I'll guess, recycler offset some of his costs, so they can trickle it down to each municipality.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you for that.
So as the mayor indicated, we had a chance to make a presentation to MPAC, so Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, jointly with Red Lake, specifically talking about gold mines and gold mine properties. They're considered special purpose properties in Ontario. Two areas we wanted to highlight, seeing as 2020 is a valuation cycle year. For MPAC was the unique circumstances, with respect to the Barrick site in Marathon and the gold mine up in Red Lake, and that it needs to be a very fair and transparent process utilized to arrive at those values, as they have very real cash consequences to each municipality. So it was the first time that I can remember in some time that the board chair and the CEO were also at our presentation, along with senior staff. So I think they were encouraged with the message. Of course, one thing we extended was we wanted to work with them and present our ideas on a go-forward basis on how we think it can work better. So they were receptive to that. And then the other thing we brought forward, and this isn't anything new, but I think it's the first time there was a little bit of agreement with respect to tailings facilities and tailings ponds in Ontario. They're currently only assessed at bare land values, which means literally zero. But obviously they have a major impact on mining facilities and their operation. So we had a very detailed discussion around that particular piece, and actually Red Lake had brought a number of maps with them to highlight how big these properties actually are. And I think MPAC was surprised with that. So they're going to follow up with us. They've committed to having a further discussion moving forward. So I think that was positive, and certainly our message got through. And as the mayor indicated, we were invited to a natural gas roundtable with Bill Walker, the Associate Minister of Energy, to specifically talk about the draft guidelines for Phase 2 of Bill 32, which is the natural gas regulation in Ontario, and specifically how the funding for that is going to roll out through the grant program. So there's $130 million that currently is earmarked for expansion projects in Ontario. Of course, we wanted to present our natural gas project and how advanced it is, and the fact that we're the only expansion project, I believe, in Ontario that's currently before the Ontario Energy Board. So we had an opportunity to present some of our solutions with respect to creative ways that money can roll out and be utilized to leverage additional funds, such as the Canada Infrastructure Bank as well as the private sector. So it was well received. We'll certainly follow up with the ministry. I think they were intrigued with some of the ideas that we presented, knowing that we literally will have a shovel-ready project likely in 3 to 4 months' time. So those are two really good sessions, and really I spent the majority of my time outside of those working on our natural gas file, specifically with our lawyers who are down in Toronto. So it was productive, and it's always good to get to a conference where it's not focused on the larger centers, and that rural and northern issues really are the focus of the conference.
Good, thank you for that. Any questions, any of that? Good, great, thank you. Well, up next, we have, of course, verbal reports from our student counselors, and go Councillor Hatton right off the bat.
So on Thursday, January 23rd, Marathon High School hosted a fundraiser barbecue at lunch. The lunch was entirely funded by Swartz, your independent grocer here in town, and the fundraiser barbecue had raised $350 for Kayla Rutenberg, who will be representing the province of Ontario at the 2020 Special Olympics Winter Games for bowling in Thunder Bay in February.
Awesome. Councillor Blanchette.
Marathon High School is in its semester 1 exam week. There's 3 days left, with Friday being a PA day, and semester 2 will be starting on February 3rd. And also at the start of semester 2, there's going to be a couple of sports days.
Great. Any questions? Thank you very much for those reports and updates. Up next, we have report on the Marathon Senior Supportive Housing. Mr. Skrzynski.
So the Marathon Senior Supportive Housing Complex is governed through the Marathon Senior Supportive Housing Corporation. This corporation is a not-for-profit with a board of directors that is comprised of members from the town of Marathon and the North Superior Healthcare Group. The town and Nosh have a management and operations agreement in place dated May the 30th, 2018. Further to this agreement, as well as the Housing Corporation Bylaw Number 1, a draft memorandum of understanding has been developed between the town and Nosh to address any annual operating deficits that may be incurred by the Senior Supportive Housing Corporation. So in the event of an annual operating deficit, the Board of Directors will convene an ad hoc committee to oversee the following process. Number 1, attempt to secure one-time operational funding from external government sources. 2, utilize non-board committed reserves and/or retained earnings. 3, utilize Barrick Gold project contributions. 4, consider short-term bank or commercial financing. 5, seek equitable funding from the Board of Director principals, which is the town and Nosh. And 6, consider tenant rent and fee schedules for the following year. It is proposed that the term of the MOU align with the term of the Management and Operations Agreement, as well as contain a renewal clause. There are no direct financial implications to the town of Marathon, and your administration recommends that bylaw number 1968 be approved, authorizing the mayor and clerk to enter into the memorandum of understanding with the North Superior Healthcare Group.
Thank you for that report. I do have a motion here that council hereby accepts the attached report and recommendation of the Marathon Senior Supportive Housing Corporation Memorandum of Understanding, and further that the appropriate bylaw be adopted authorizing the mayor and the clerk to sign the Memorandum of Understanding with the North Shore Superior Healthcare Group with regard to the Marathon Senior Supportive Housing Corporation. Moved by Councillor Lake, and second by Councillor Gingras. Any questions of that report? Hearing none, call a question, all in favor. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bushi.
What's the importance of the memorandum of understanding coinciding with the renewal clause? I mean, is that so it ends at the same time, or?
That's correct. So there's no specific reason why. What we've just tried to do, and this is really just a good governance housekeeping item, is just to align agreements so that if there is board turnover, if there is staff turnover, that the dates align when these things come due.
Nothing else? Okay, good. All in favor? Carried, thank you. Report on the liquefied natural gas, Mr. Skoczynski.
So I'm not going to go through this report verbatim because it contains a lot of legalese, but I'll highlight some of the key areas. So since 2015, obviously, the municipalities of Scriber, Terrace Bay, Manitouwadge, Wawa, and Marathon have been developing a liquefied natural gas project. The required application to the Ontario Energy Board for a leave to construct was submitted in September of 2019. A public utility, 2729028 Ontario Inc., has been incorporated under the Ontario Business Corporations Act to govern and regulate the distribution of natural gas within the 5 communities. So establishment of a public utility by the municipalities is regulated in Ontario. So Section 203 of the Act authorizes a municipality to establish corporations, to nominate or authorize a person to act as a director, or acquire an interest in a corporation under such conditions as may be prescribed. Ontario Regulation 599/06 provides that a municipality may provide any service or thing necessary or desirable for the public, and this includes public utilities. So the distribution of natural gas is a public utility which is clearly permissible for a municipality to provide as a service. Section 4 of Ontario Regulation 599 confirms the ability of municipalities to nominate or authorize a person to sit on a board of directors. And then lastly, Section 14 of Ontario Regulation 599 authorizes a municipality to hold debt instruments or other promissory notes from a corporation under Section 203 of the Ontario Business Corporations Act. So with respect to our actual corporation, the ownership and subscription of shares in the proposed LNG Corporation, this is also a security permitted under the Act, so the town of Marathon may enter into this Act. Furthermore, a municipality is authorized to invest in bonds, debentures, promissory notes, etc., issued to a corporation under the laws of Canada. And by virtue of the investment provisions of Section 14 of Ontario Regulation 599, is permissible for additional funds to be provided to the LNG Corporation if the context so requires in the future. with respect to such limitations as noted previously. So with respect to execution of the unanimous shareholders agreement between the 5 municipality, Section 8 of the Act confers the powers of a natural person on a municipality. So this includes the right of a municipality to enter into contracts and agreements. So the authority to enter into a unanimous shareholders agreement is included within this scope. And based on the foregoing provisions, it is permissible for a municipality to pass the proposed bylaw, which is attached to this report as Schedule B, including the authorization to subscribe for securities in the LNG Corporation, to appoint a director to the LNG Corporation, and to execute the unanimous shareholders agreement. So the financial implications: 20 Class A common shares in the share capital of the LNG Corporation, representing 1/5 of the total issued, and outstanding shares, has a subscription price of $20 total. And your administration recommends that bylaw 1969 be approved, authorizing that the corporation of the town of Marathon be and is hereby authorized to subscribe for 20 Class A common shares in the share capital of the LNG Corporation, that the corporation of the town of Marathon enter into a unanimous shareholders agreement with the LNG Corporation and the other shareholders substantially in the form of the unanimous shareholders agreement attached and marked as Schedule A to bylaw 1969, and that the town of Marathon authorize the recruitment process to establish a board of directors for 2729028 Ontario, Inc. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. I have a motion here that council hereby accepts the attached report and recommendation on liquefied natural gas project shareholders agreement. Refer that the appropriate bylaw be adopted authorizing the mayor and clerk to sign the LNG project shareholders agreement, authorize the subscription for shares in 2729028 Ontario, Inc., the LNG Corporation, Liquefied Natural Gas Distribution Corporation. Moved by Councilor Debuchy, second by Councilor Valens. Questions? Councilor Lake.
Yeah, that was tremendously interesting. But at the bottom line, the project, which on its face is this regional project, my understanding is it's been run primarily through our municipality. We've been the driving force. You've been the driving force in lots of this. We'd be 1/5 of the ownership. Is there any one? Is it the mayor who becomes that position, or is it our CAO, or do we appoint somebody else? And two, given that most of it is run out of this community, is there a sense that we'll still maintain kind of most of the control of it? Do you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like all that work's gone into making it work for the region, but certainly Marathon's been the driving force. How do we maintain control in terms of, or do you just give that up when you become a board of directors?
So a bit of yes and a bit of no. So you do give up, the municipalities, and I'll be glad when I can do it, will give up control of the project and the process, and it will be the local utility that does take that process forward, because it is the local utility that's granted the leave to construct by the Ontario Energy Board. So they ultimately become the business to run the operation. And, the example I used, we had a meeting last week with the mayors and CAOs, the example I used of this process, and really what it turns into, is the establishment of the Local Forest Management Corporation. Very similar process. But that being stated, what the unanimous shareholders agreement does is it allows the municipality, obviously, to authorize one individual to represent the town of Marathon. It can't be an officer or a director of the corporation, i.e. it can't be myself or council, but council gets to choose a qualified individual. It's going to be the process is actually regulated through the Ontario Energy Board, so it's a very specific set of skills that are going to be required to sit on the board, and there'll be a congruent process with the other 4 municipalities to arrive at that decision. Where I think Marathon gains benefit within the shareholders agreement, and it's fair for everybody, is how dividends are ultimately distributed when the utility does start to earn revenues. So it's really based on a 2/3, 1/3 process. So 1/3 is that any dividend is going to be split equally with respect to the bottom line. So we all get 1/5 of that. But where there's the opportunity and where the size of your community comes into play is that 2/3 of that dividend is based on the volume and the attachment of the community. So if our community, we use an example, when we did our attachment forecast, 83% of Marathon residents said they would attach to natural gas. That's where we're going to ultimately derive the economic benefit because of the size of our community and the volume that's utilized.
And just one quick up on that, any one big industry, so example, like the Terrace Bay Mill has a big industry, if they go on, and Marathon with Barrick, if they go on, that's a benefit to the communities as well. So there's a big volume users, but the 2/3 is really a key protector for the communities that are gonna create economic opportunities for the LDC. Councillor DeBouche.
Yeah, so there's 5 common shares or 20 common shares here. What is our ability then to say, as a shareholder, or say our neighbor, Bipigon, is interested in a liquefied plant? Is it become our responsibility, or is it the board also who would decide on expanding to the other area? And would they have an opportunity to buy in, thus watering down our shares, and or would they become a customer?
Yeah, so lots in that question. I'll try and break it apart. So the municipalities ultimately retain control through the shareholders agreement. And really, the shares within the corporation are broken down into Class A's and potentially Class B's. So Class A's are the 5 municipalities. The municipalities have to stay on the shareholder agreement for a minimum of 3 years. If they choose to leave at that time, it's the other Class A shareholders that have the ability to purchase their shares to up their stake. After, I think it's 7 years, there's the ability to look at bringing on Class B shareholders if the board so decided. Highly unlikely that's going to happen, because if the corporation's making money, why would you look at watering down that further investment? So the reality becomes there's likely other communities that look to get on stream by becoming customers of the actual LDC. Having gone through the process now, very complicated, time-consuming, expensive to set one up. The recommendation, I would say, is anybody looking at doing it, just contract with an LDC.
Absolutely. A key component of your question as well is that once we create the LDC, which we're in the process after tonight, this passing of the bylaw, we then only appoint our 1 board member. There's 5 board members, 1 from each municipality. Then at large, they'll attract 2 new board members, so there'll be a 7 board member. We now have no more say within the operation of the LDC. That's driven by the board and the business model. Then they'll hire their staff. They'll do all their things through that agency. We'll only have our input as far as the individual that represents our community, similar to all the other 4 other municipalities. I think you had a follow-up. Now I'll come back to you, Councillor Lake.
Okay, so one of the things I don't think I quite got across was that even though this project is being funded most part, one of the big concerns is always operation and age, I'll say. So in the event that you needed to raise capital to do upgrades or funding, as opposed to, because you're limited on the energy board about raising your pricing, because it's I'll say regulated, natural gas is regulated. Is the option of issuing Class B stocks to raise capital, is that a viable portion? I mean, that's basically what you do in the business world, but I don't know, is that a viable option? Or do we still have to keep trying to access the funding that we're eligible for here?
Yeah, so really there's one of 2 things that's likely to happen. So as part of the development of the utility right now, we're in, I would say, semi-detailed discussions with commercial lenders who are ultimately, very interested in capitalizing the utility. So there's 0 burden on the municipality. It doesn't affect our borrowing ability. But contained within the shareholders agreement is the ability for a municipality to contribute further than the 20 Class A shares. So, the municipality would be a shareholder, but also has the ability, if they so choose, to be an investor as well. So I don't have any concerns that the capital isn't going to be there. I think actually there's a lot of interest, and the other piece, with our project, is the ability to hopefully attract those grant funds from the Bill 32 Phase 2 regulations that will ultimately capitalize the startup.
Councillor Lake?
We've talked forever as a resource-based town about diversifying our economy and finding some revenue stream for a municipality. They don't exist very much. And we've talked lots about other sorts of utilities and being a utility holder. We talked about wind at one point. We talked about biomass and becoming utility. Is this organization going to be strictly natural gas, or does it have the ability to also deliver, as a utility, other energy streams, which would result in kind of diversifying our stream?
Legally, it could. So a public utility in Ontario obviously is regulated by the Municipal Act, and the Municipal Act says that a public utility can enter into certain areas of business, gas being one, electricity, telecommunications. So that opportunity would exist. You would not have to create a new corporation to offer additional services. Water is another example.
Anything else? So, before we call the question, I want to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Straczynski, as there's been a lot of work put into this process. He's not off the hook yet, but he's getting close to
Getting
being
there.
taken off the hook in regards to the process going forward. This is the final phase of creating the LDC. Once the LDC, the board members appointed, then basically a lot of that work will come off the table from the municipalities and go to the board. So that'll happen probably over the next couple of months. The OEB is in the final phase of the intervenor process. Some of the intervenors have been asking questions. Those questions will be answered by legal. Legal will take care of that. The OEB will then make their decision. We feel very comfortable that the decision will be passed down over the next several weeks. With that being said, then the corporation will move forward in regards to now laying out the plans. The first part of this process has already been through the process. The OEB has approved it. The plant will be constructed starting in the spring of 2020 in the end of the line outside of Nipigon, and that will take place over the summer, hopefully be developed and ready to roll by the fall of 2020. So once the OEB finalizes the process for all of us, that gives the LDC the opportunity now to go out and start construction in our communities of those plants, and then, of course, feeding the community. So we're hoping all best case scenario will be all 2021, we'll all be hooked up to gas, but that's to be heard and seen, but we feel comfortable on those dates. Councilor Lake?
Maybe just a question then as a resident, thinking about, you know, you said that the higher the uptake is within your municipality, we're hoping for 83%, the more income for the municipality. When do we start that process of educating the public, of answering some of the questions around, you know, is it cost efficient for me in my particular home situation? Are we going to sort of try to get out in front of that, or are you thinking that's going to be something we look at in 2021?
No, so it's really all predicated on the Ontario Energy Board process. So once the approval is granted, there will be a set of open houses within the municipalities to educate on those types of questions. You know, how do I convert? What's it going to cost? What does it mean? I think, you know, honestly, people really overthink, you know, how complicated the project is. Yes, it's big and it's got a big capital ticket item, but it's not that complicated. You see natural gas in, you know, a lot of areas. But the other thing that'll happen, you know, as, you know, and you know, why tonight's, if council passes, is so important, is what's going to happen is the LDC is going to start to be staffed up. Right, so you're going to hire your key executive team, and what's also likely going to happen is a sales team, right? And they'll be the ones that'll answer those questions in each of the municipalities on a go-forward basis, so people get the information that they need.
And just a quick follow-up. So part of the discussions over the last, you know, year and a half is how does that look in regards to some of the CapEx for those conversions? That'll all be discussed through the LDC and that board and that staff, is whether there's opportunities to fund. And, you know, like a prime example, if you got a furnace change out and it's $3,000, maybe there's an opportunity to fund that through the LDC with a payback on a monthly basis through your conversion. So that's not us, though. That's all the LDC, how that'll look and how that'll roll out. But, of course, you want to make it as easy as possible for homeowners and business to convert, so you have the bigger customer base. So let's hope that all works out at the end of the day in regards to how that CapEx scenario of the project goes. But we're getting there, and thank you for all the hard work you've done.
Thank you.
And, of course, that's since 2015. It's been a long road.
That's two Crown Corporations.
Yeah.
Essentially two Crown Corporations created our
Absolutely, for sure. Yep. So with that all being said, I'll call the question in favor of the motion. Carried. Thank you very much. Okay, I have a motion here for the following check runs to be approved for payment.
Oops,
and-
Your Worship,
Oh.
just one quick verbal.
Oh, sorry, yes, I'm
See?
sorry, and I just went on there. The signed, the use of single-use plastic, sorry about that.
I'll be quick, I've been talking most of the day today. I just wanted to provide an update with respect to single-use plastics, so I know that's been on council's radar. And wanted to inform council that I did meet with the Chamber of Commerce president last week, because I know that the Chamber is looking at undertaking a couple of initiatives to slowly transition away from utilization of single-use, specifically around plastic bags, to try and be more eco-friendly. And what I offered up to Ms. Bobrowski is that the municipality is very interested in supporting that. We'd like to be a part of that from a partnership perspective moving forward, and would certainly put some funds toward that, as well as help with some of the messaging in the community. So really what we talked about was approaching it in phases, which was, you know, continue to educate the public on trying to reduce the amount of plastics they're using, and then ultimately introduce some initiatives over the course of 2020 and encourage people to do that, and that we would look at potentially a bylaw near the end of 2020 to look at how we can further reduce that through the municipal process, as you're seeing a number of municipalities now across Canada starting to introduce those. So just want to make council aware of that, because it was something you indicated as being important moving forward, and that we'll participate with our Chamber of Commerce with respect to their initiative.
Great, thanks for that. And also, there's a community, supportive community for the sustainable community
Yes.
members have a box at the Savards for reuse and take one, leave one bag program. It's working really well, so I just encourage residents to drop off all their reusable bags and to continue to use it. Share it. Councilor Lake?
The other thing that, just in terms of the community changing a little bit, and plastic bags in particular, is more and more, as I shop, I see lots of Ballard vehicles in that parking lot, and I know as probably one of the bigger users of that facility right now, just discussions with Ballard around that's the way we're looking to go as municipality, because I see tons and tons of contractors in there over the last couple of months,
Certainly.
and that's going to be lots of those folks don't have a house in town, and so working with them would probably be important too.
We certainly have those discussions.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, sure.
So, through this process, so I had a community member bring up a comment to me once it went through, it was a big article in the paper, around looking at bag usage for roadside recycling specifically, around maybe, putting your bin at the roadside for your cardboard instead of a bag, so you'd reduce that way. So just if you can look at those opportunities as well through our contractor there.
Yeah, and I think anything, that's the discussion we had with the chamber, right? Was anything that we can do to proactively encourage and not force people to do will likely be far more successful than passing a bylaw that says thou shalt do something. So certainly be happy to take that forward.
Yeah, Councilor Gingras, the problem is we discussed in our budget process today with the GFL being the only provider and there's no market for the product. It's kind of, we can have that discussion, but as you see the increase in their fees already for the recycling program, how do you remove that bag and create a blue box system or a container system? It now brings a lot more work onto the actual contract. So you could have that chat, but it might be very hard because we're already into that contract with that, correct?
Yeah, I know we have had that, Mr. Hishkin and I have had that discussion with GFL previously, about the potential of them subsidizing different boxes or, but that does become the challenge is, how do you collect, how do you sort? But certainly if there's, more innovative ways we can do things, which reduces the amount of waste, obviously a plastic recycling bag is a piece of waste as well, then, we'll certainly do that when we have the opportunity.
Thank you.
Good, thanks. Okay. So I do have a motion here now for the following check runs to be approved for payment.
Sorry, Your Worship, there's number 9, administration report.
Oh, no, I'm just going by the bylaws here, the way they're written up here. Sorry. I'm way ahead of myself, sorry. Ms. Goodchild, in regard to the follow-up, because my motion is way down here, that's why. Okay.
Okay, so at the last meeting of council, you guys asked us to further discuss the golf course fee for tournaments. So on Tuesday, January 14th, I reached out to the men's club once again and did not get a response. I did get a phone call from a men's club member, and I discussed over the phone the purpose of the fee, and he seemed to understand and more or less was in favor. A reminder that this is a decrease in the fee from $16.25 or $27 down to $15. And this is per tournament, whereas the old fee was per holes per day. So it could be $27 per day, which will now be $15 total per person. We still recommend that we go with a $15 fee, and that would assist with having numbers for tournaments and not closing the course for a tournament of 10 to 12 people and still allowing it to be open to the public.
Yeah, I'll get the motion on the floor first. Everybody's excited to get in there. Are you?
Yep, so it was
Okay.
just a verbal.
Okay, thank you for that report. But I do have a motion here in regards to the town's bylaw to establish fees and charges for the amendment of this in regards to that. So the bylaw number 1970 being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 1964 being a bylaw to authorize the establishment of fees and charges for the town of Marathon for the year ending December 31st, 2020, be read at first and second time this 27th day of January 2020. So mover, Council Lake, seconder, Council Jingra. Now we can ask those questions, Council Lake.
Sorry. So I'm just looking for clarification again. So it's the charge would only be charged to the clubs if the golf course is shut down to everybody. If you're just booking tee times, and somebody else could get on during the day, there's no charge. For the
So I just want to make a clarification. So it's important to note that it's not a fee that's necessarily charged to just the clubs. It's a fee charged to outside users utilizing the course for a tournament booking. So if it was the men's club or if it was Jim from Thunder Bay, they're both charged the same amount of money to utilize the course. I just want to make that clear. That's not targeted at the clubs.
Okay.
It's targeted at outside users utilizing the course privately.
Okay, sorry. I don't know how golf works particularly, but it really the reasoning behind it is you don't want a really small group of people, like a tournament of 15 people, closing down the club for the day. If you want to do that, if you want the privilege of that, you pay for the whole course. That makes sense. Now, my understanding, again, I'm not a golfer, but it's not going to affect somebody like the women's club because there aren't enough golfers to shut down the thing, and they currently use that format, right, where they just book tee times?
Correct. So this past year, they didn't require the course to be closed at all, so it didn't affect them.
Okay, good, thank you.
Councilor Valens.
So just for further clarification too, it's $15 per golfer per tournament, not per each day of the tournament, just $15 one weekend.
Correct.
Thank you.
So clarification in regards to Councilor Lake, and simply that, if Club A, B, or C, in town, out town, wants to book the course exclusively, they pay the fee. If they want to come in and book 6 tee-off times, they don't pay the fee.
Correct.
Correct. So there's clarity all across the board. Everybody knows that if you want exclusive use of the facility, you're gonna have to pay a fee for that exclusivity. And the fee is $15. We're all good with the fee? Per player. Everybody's good?
I support it,
And this had to come back 3 times, that's. Council Lake?
So my and this, I think, just comes down to good governance, right? I mean, I think it came back because the last time you were here,
Sure.
you said we didn't get to talk to it was a men's
Clubs,
club, I
okay.
think. And so we pursued that conversation. If they don't want to have the conversation, then we have to make a decision. But it didn't come back because I don't think anybody thought it was a bad idea. It didn't come back because we didn't feel like there was communication. Sounds like there was communication. There was some agreement there. That just feels like good governance, not. So I appreciate the extra effort on your behalf.
Thank you.
Okay. So the motion doesn't have a fee in it, but I'm gonna put the fee of $15. Cause it's in the bylaw, but I just wanna make sure it's in the motion as well. Yeah, but it wasn't now you're gonna incorporate in the fees and charges though then, I guess, is that how you're gonna identify it? But just on top of that, I'll put a fee of $15 on this motion, so we're good on that. Thank you for that report. So with that being said, I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay. I have a motion here now for the check runs to be approved for payment and accounts payable for the amount of $679,853.82 and payroll in the amount of $187,431.66. Moved by Councilor Zingrich, second by Councilor Lake. Any questions of those payments? Hearing none, I call a question. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Couple bylaws. Bylaw number 1968 being the bylaw to authorize Corporation Town of Marathon to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the North Superior Healthcare Group with regard to the Marathon Senior Supportive Housing Complex to be read at first and second time this 27th day of January 2020. Moved by Councilor Lake, seconded by Councilor Shingra. Thank you. Any questions of that bylaw? Hearing none, call a question. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Bylaw number 1969 being a bylaw to authorize the subscription for shares in company numbered 2729028 Ontario Inc., the LNG Corporation, Liquefied Natural Gas Distribution Corporation, and the execution of the unanimous shareholders agreement governing the affairs of the LNG Corporation be read a first and second time this 27th day of January 2020. Moved by Councillor Lake, second by Councillor Valence. Any questions of that bylaw? Hearing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. And of course, we have bylaws number 1968, 1969, and 1970 to be read a third time and finally passed this 27th day of January 2020. Moved by Councillor Valence, second by Councillor Lake. Any questions of those final bylaws? Hearing none, call a question. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. And anything else before we adjourn at the hour of 7:51? Hearing none, we don't have an in-camera. We had an in-camera previous to this council meeting, so we have nothing. So we adjourn at 7:51 p.m. Thank you and have a good night. Moved by Councillor Lake, second by Councillor Valence.